Death Guard Sorcerers. Once, so long ago, before he had even met his master, his name had been Cagliostro Varsal. He was touted as one of the most gifted psychers in any librarium. Not the most powerful, which was odd, but his ability, his aptitude for the arcane, was astonishing to any of his peers. But back then, he, like all psychers, was despised, would be sent to distant worlds in insignificant expeditions. But this was purely to get rid of him, was what most believed. Yet in his time, away from the prying eyes of those with rank enough to stop him, he studied. He garnered many artifacts and tomes of hidden outlawed knowledge. And luckily, during the period leading up to and immediately preceding from the Council of Nicaea, Cagliostro had made himself scarce and joined a distant siege detachment, hiding from his detractors and using what others called boredom time between events to study and practice his craft. He became powerful indeed, far more so than he should. As the heresy began and the situation changed, Varsal made common cause with someone who could protect him and see his many uses. A rarity in the Death Guard of that period. But in his master, he found what he needed. For in all of the Legion, in all of the expeditions he had ever participated in, only Ullik the Unreasonable seemed to be open to his friendship. Of course, it was largely one way, from he to Ullik, but the pact gave him what he wanted. As the influence of the grandfather swept throughout the Legion, his presence was no more lauded, but it was less likely he would wake up with a crack grenade beneath his pillow. Now, after all of these centuries, he had transformed. Few remembered his old name. Now, he was Baron Bloatfest, the Turgid. Fewer still knew the full name of his master, Ullik, as it should be. For they were ancient now, ancient. Often he had been at the front, where the fighting was fiercest, where the fire was most harsh. Yet he always pulled through it. Praise Nurgle indeed. His miasmas of flies would shield his brothers as they strode forward. His pestilences would infest and bring down walls to allow the Marines entry to even the most seemingly invincible bunkers. His plague winds would sweep before their advance, annihilating all it rolled over, as buboes and pustules exploded from the humans who it touched, leaving them screaming from cancerous voice boxes or whimpering for the release of death. At least he was all too happy to grant them, if they would not turn to his master for aid, of course. But now he was one of the elect. He was chosen, for he now sat at his master's side, always. Some thought this was protection against enemy sorcery, but the Baron knew better. He knew the Unreasonable One was in no danger whatsoever. Yet perhaps this would lead others to believe that he was vulnerable to magic. Cunning. Ullik had always been a conundrum, even before the heresy, but now, Ullik alone of all of his peers in the Death Guard had constantly risen since Istvan, and Baron Bloatfest hove to him like an acolyte its teacher, for only here was he safe. Only here was he valued, and only here, at Ullik's side, was he free. For his master was both generous and patient, and with his patronage, if the Baron could explain the need, the benefits, then there was little he could not ask, little he could not request, as long as he provided those results. There was competition, of course, the word-bearer. How he hated that wizard. Even more gifted, even more powerful, some said. Able to even worry 1,000 suns in the art. Yet the Baron knew. This one was a catspawn lickspittle. A runaround and herald. And every day, in some small way, the Baron planned the downfall of the word-bearer. For one day, inevitably, he knew. They would cross hexes, would trade spells. He could feel it in his marrow, in every boil and blister. Yet with those artifacts he had gained, he was confident it would not be a mismatch. He only needed a sign from his master, from the Unreasonable One. Then he would catch the fly and pin it to his wall, and torture said wizard for his secrets, even were it to take all eternity. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the factions, forces, and faces of the Warhammer 40k setting, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace. There is only time for war. Don't forget that we have a natural history and mythology channels now. Links in the description. Our whopping near hour-long video on Zeus is up, so go have a shufti. And now, let us proceed. For this week, we shall be taking a woefully brief look into the foul warp-wielding warriors of Nurgle's Death Guard, his sorcerers. Mortarion and many of his men are certainly not in awe of these beings, as we are about to hear. But do not worry. I shall explain why after we have heard the base lore. And so, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Death Guard Sorcerers. Harnessing the energies of the warp, the sorcerers of the Death Guard call down the repugnant blessings of Nurgle upon ally and enemy alike. Withering plagues weaken their foes, causing bones to rot and splinter, and muscle to waste away to red-brown sludge. Vile conjurations conceal the Death Guard from their enemies amid storms of hairy black flies, or else swell their bloated bodies with unnatural might and fecund resilience. Demonic blights are summoned forth that burn through the enemy ranks like wildfire, while the battlefield itself turns to rot and ruin. Fortifications crumble as empiric parasites burrow through their foundations. Many Death Guard sorcerers can even channel the disgusting power of Nurgle directly through their own tainted bodies, their jaws gaping wide to spew ectoplasmic vomit and filth in such abundance that a stream of corruption drowns the enemy. Such abilities are as horrific as they are powerful, yet still, they are viewed with distaste by Mortarion and many of his great champions. The Death Lord's hatred for Psykers survived even his transformation into a being of immaterial energies. Though he would not refuse the gifts that Nurgle bestows upon his sons, Mortarion is under no obligation to like them. The sorcerers of the Death Guard do not seem to resent the contempt that their fellows hold them in. Indeed, they thrive amongst the ranks of the Death Guard like disease in an unwilling host. Some delight in lording over their less gifted brothers, while others form demonic subsects and foster cults of mortal followers to do their bidding. Over the centuries, the sorcerers of the Death Guard have concocted many outlandish names for these sects, based around the powers they exhibit. Thus were born the Malignant Plague Casters, the Slopmore Maggot Masters, the Cadaverous Flamebringers, and many others. The Lords of the Death Guard recognize the sorceress' ability as living weapons upon the field of battle. Some lords even permit their sorcerers a level of command, sifting out the many insights in their half-sane ramblings. Rarely are the sorcerers themselves respected or valued, however. Largely, they remain pariahs amongst their brothers. Only within the Vectorums of the Fourth Plague Company does this differ. For here the Eater of Lives holds sway. This ancient entity values psykers highly for their ability to wield the warp and summon waves of demons to the battlefield, and so insists that they lead in place of plague god lords. Malignant plague casters. Malignant plague casters fill the air with billowing filth. With every gurgling inhalation, they draw lungfuls of noxious vapours from the garden of Nurgle, the plague god's noxious realm within the warp, before blowing them out in phlegm-thick clouds that can rot a man to the bone in seconds. Potent Death Guard sorcerers, these vile psykers are warp-rotted from their pallid fly-blown skin to their ever-churning innards. They have bargained away what remained of their very souls in exchange for Nurgle's blessings, and have been gifted with the ability to channel the malaise of the plague god's realm. The bloated bodies of malignant plague casters have become living conduits for the garden of Nurgle's toxic miasmas. Flesh-eating spore clouds, droning plague flies, vomitous mists, and plague-laden corpse gas roil within the plague caster's guts, at times straining their skin to bursting point. With retching exhalations, the plague casters blow these lethal clouds across the battlefield. The effects of such noxious clouds upon mortal victims are immediate and hideous. Warriors collapse, choking under their own rotting lungs, even as their flesh blackens and liquefies. Armour corrodes, and weapons spark and splutter as they are eaten away. Even sealed fortifications offer no protection, the plague casters' fumes devouring metal and stone as easily as they do flesh. End quote. Now most other legions consider their psykers gifted by their patron gods to be assets without compare. They are deadly, yes, even to their brethren loyalist space marines, but more than this, they are walking conduits to their god, a clear and present sign that they are blessed by their benefactor. For despite the psyker harnessing the powers of the warp, as they did even when they were loyalists in the Librarius, they now rely on the power of their patron god to perform their miracles. So when a sorcerer opens his hand and bends reality, it is also, to some small extent, an acknowledgement from their god that they are doing the right thing. In this way, sorcerers are also unto high priests in some warbands and legions, almost akin to the miracle-working priests of the Astra Militarum or Sisters of Battle. And it has a phenomenal effect on morale, having God on your side, as they say. But not so in the Death Guard. Now some legions, like the Iron Warriors or the Eighth, the Night Lords, have not fully gone over to worshipping one patron deity of chaos. Yet they are still adherents, even if only as opposition to the Emperor and his Imperium. Not as savage fanatics, such as the Thousand Sons, Emperor's Children, or Word-Bearers. And of course, there are those warriors gone over to Khorne, like the World Eaters. And the Lord of Skulls is one god who is vehemently against all foul witchery. But so is true with the Death Guard, although not to the same extent. They will use them, but despise wizards. But why? Mortarion, their Primarch, was brought up on Barbarous, which is dominated by a Xenos race, but they were, above all else, warp users. When Mortarion led a rebellion against these lich-like beings, the costs were high, and only the intervention of the Emperor himself brought the king of these liches down. Mortarion could not do it alone. Thus Mortarion and all of the later recruits from Barbarous to the Death Guard were staunchly against any form of warp use in the Imperium. They tolerated the Psychana Telepathica, who send and receive messages. They knew the worth of the Navigators, despite they also being mutants in their eyes. Yet the use of Psycha powers in the Legion was most unwelcomed, despite some Astartes being incredibly well endowed. At the Council of Nicaea, where the legions were all present and represented to discuss the use of the newly formed Liberius, it was Mortarion himself, who was one of the most staunch and vindictive in casting this practice down. So even when they went over to Nurgle, the use of Psycha powers, despite them knowing they emanated from their god, was not liked at all. Mortarion really went over to save his sons, not out of any acceptance of Nurgle into his heart, and despite Mortarion being a demon Primarch, he still despises these tricks and powers. Hence, the root of all of this is their Primarch and his most senior officers, barring Typhus, of course. But many believe that Typhus is more of a leader to the Death Guard and more beloved by the grandfather than even the demon Primarch. But that, O gentle listener, is a tale for another time. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. A reminder that we have other avenues of entertainment in the description. Yet, it is all just light entertainment to ease you after a long day of work. Nothing more, nothing less. So if you're interested in dinosaurs, natural history, or mythology, go have a look in the description. Thank you for your precious time. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.